ever, I guess COVID caused created virtual lunch and learns. So yay. This is our second one. Our first one went great. And so I think we're going to keep going. I'm excited to say we had 108 people sign up for this. And so we were really pleased with that and excited. And this is being recorded. Yes, thank you, Zach, for those who cannot attend. My name's Jenny Rude. I'm the president of Arcan. And on behalf of all the board members, we wanted to wish you a warm welcome today as we learn together about inclusive advising strategies. We are hoping to continue these throughout the spring, and we have talked about opening it up to members who would like to submit a proposal to present for a future Lunch and Learn. So stay tuned for more information coming by email, probably within the next 2 weeks. We will have participants muted, and if you're not muted for some reason, if you could mute yourself. But we do have Dr. Krista Nelson, our VP of Diversity, moderating the chat, so feel free to type questions or comments, and we will leave some time at the end to address as many as we can. So I wanted to introduce our presenter, Austin Shader. He is a native of Fayetteville, Arkansas. He serves as the Director of Enrollment Services at Northwest Arkansas Community College's Washington County campus. Austin's been working in higher ed for 10 years and has spent most of his time working in advising. He is a first-generation college student, received his first degree from NWAC in 2012. Then he received a Bachelor of Arts in History from Columbia College in 2014, and a Master of Science in College Personnel Services from our ASU in 2017. He's passionate about diversity, equity, inclusion, and advocating for social justice. And he also serves on our board as our two-year college rep, and I'm so excited about that. So without further ado, Austin, I'm going to turn it over to you to present.
Thanks, Jenny. Let me share my screen real quick.
You may need to put it on speaker view, everyone who's participating.
There we go. Okay. All right. So as Jenny said, my name is Austin Shader. I have been in higher ed for a little over 10 years. I started out as a work study at NWAC, so I've worked in almost any area you could think of. I worked in testing, Dean of Students office, admissions, student records. Only office I haven't really worked in is financial aid. My computer's not cooperating. I use he, him, his pronouns. You're going to hear a lot about pronouns and things like that today. So really my goal for today is to, kind of increase awareness for inclusivity for our varying populations within our college campuses. Like Jenny said, I'm pretty passionate about diversity and inclusion. I'm a member of the LGBTQIA+ population, so that is something that's personal for me. And I hope that by the end of this, you've come away with at least one or two things that maybe you didn't know that now you know, or more than that. We are going to have time for questions at the end. So if you guys have any questions, you can post them in the chat, or we can wait until the end, however you guys want to do that. Excuse me, not you guys, you all want to do that. So I'm going to start off with really why inclusion strategies or being inclusive matters. So every decision that we make raises or lowers the barriers or lowers the bar for our student experience. And so as advisors, we work with students on a day-to-day basis who may be struggling or they need assistance. And that's kind of our job to identify what barriers there are, to close any gaps for them and kind of provide a connection to necessary services, whether that be on campus or within the community. And so for me, that's something I try to remember, that everything I do, every time I'm helping with a policy or procedure or office practice, or even if I'm teaching a class inside my classroom, I try to keep this in mind, that my job is to recognize barriers and close any gaps and provide, as much assistance as I can. So to start off, just kind of some of the benefits of inclusion. When you look at it from an advising standpoint, I know not everyone in here is an advisor, But from an advising standpoint, if you look at it as a recruiting tool, a connection tool, and even a retention tool, that's one of the biggest benefits of inclusion, is that when you institute inclusive strategies or inclusive practices, either in your day-to-day life or just in your office or in your classroom or whatever, it's a huge recruiting tool to bring students to you. The more inclusive you are, the more people it's going to bring in. And then at the same time, the connection point is that the students experience a sense of belonging with you, or within your institution or your office or whatever space that you're in. And so that makes a connection point. And then at the same time, those students, once they have established that connection point, it increases their success personally and academically. So within the scope of academics, it increases your retention. And so that's just there's other benefits to inclusion, of course, but from an advising or enrollment standpoint, those are probably the three biggest things that you can think about as to why you should be more inclusive. To understand and to know how to be more inclusive, you kind of have to understand the challenges that students in underrepresented populations face. If you think about it kind of as you're sitting at a table and every one of these is a rock placed on that table in front of a student within an underrepresented population, you can kind of mentally or visually understand how they deal with these challenges. And so one of the biggest challenges that students of underrepresented populations face is invisibility. So students in this category, they're typically the most underserved and underrepresented students on our campuses. So you think of them, a lot of them are students of color, students of varying ethnicities or racial identities, students that are housing or food insecure, students that live below the poverty line, students that are working parents or they have children, students that are undocumented or that they have undocumented family members, students in the LGBTQIA+ population, and even students living with disabilities. So some of those most underrepresented populations on our campuses are also the most invisible when it comes to our services, our practices, and our policies and procedures. Students also have to deal with, that are in these underrepresented populations, also have to deal with environments or behaviors that promote bias. They have to deal with isolation. Microaggressions are a huge thing for a lot of these students. If you don't know what a microaggression is, it's those kind of brief or commonplace daily, just verbal, they can be behavior or even environmental indignities. And sometimes they're not intentional, sometimes they are, but what they do is they communicate a hostile or a derogatory or even a negative attitude towards a stigmatized or racially or culturally marginalized group. So like, if you're a person of color and you've ever heard people say, oh, you do math well for somebody like you, or you're a woman that said, and you've heard the term, you throw good for a girl. Those are microaggressions. And while they may be culturally acceptable in some areas, if you think about it, if you've ever had that experience, it's a little tiny dig every single time you hear that. So underrepresented populations on our campus, they definitely experience microaggressions. They also experience a lack of representation on campus. So some of our colleges and universities in the country, they have been working to decrease the lack of diversity representation, but there are still a large number of colleges that don't reflect their diverse student populations. So think about the campus where you're at or the location that you're at, and think about your student population, and then ask yourself, does the faculty and staff and administration makeup of my college look like my student population? More than likely, the answer is probably no. Students also deal in these populations, they also deal with depression, anxiety, other mental health concerns. The age range for college students between the ages of 18 and 25 is the peak time for a lot of mental health issues to appear. specifically schizophrenia. And so a lot of students deal with those kinds of things, even if they're not in underrepresented populations. Students also, these students, they find a challenge in being in culture shock. You know, some of them, if they live on campus, they've never lived away from home, or they're living in areas that aren't like where they're from. Especially you think in the context, international students, they can experience a huge culture shock. You can also, some of them may experience bias incidents or even criminal activity that targets them because of their diversity. And they obviously will have increased stress. So those are just a few challenges, but just to put yourself in that student's shoes, like, you know, if you think about it, if one student that's in an underrepresented population experiences even one of these, plus everything that college entails, it can be very debilitating and it can be very hard for them to be successful. But if you're a student in an underrepresented population and you experience it every single one of these, even once a week throughout the semester, plus all the college stuff that they're working on, you can definitely see why some students just don't finish and why they're just not successful. So I'm going to go into some tips and tricks for inclusive design. So with inclusive design, it's always important to remember that that labels are for soup cans. So I had someone tell me that and I was like, what are you talking about? But if you think about it, everything we do, sometimes everything within our society is some kind of label for someone. And so I try to do as much as I can think about in every situation, like, am I labeling this person? Because if I am, they're not a soup can, they're a person. But one of the biggest or the easiest ways for us to include inclusivity in our day-to-day practices, it doesn't just have to be within the advising realm, but in our day-to-day practices is simple things like remembering or understanding that students come from various backgrounds and they come from varying family structures. So in our society, it's very common that you still see on forums, you still see even in our day-to-day practices that we ask people, what's your mom's name, what's your dad's name? Something simple, just as simple as remembering that not everyone has a parent at home. Some people are raised by legal guardians. Some people are in the foster system, and so they don't, quote unquote, really have parents or even someone that advocates for them other than a caseworker. But using terms like parent or guardian and adding that to your day-to-day language can make just the idea of family structure inclusivity pretty straightforward for everyone. As far as cultural and social navigation goes, you always want to be aware of cultural or social climates that are happening in the present time. Because any student that's within an underrepresented population that belongs to a group that is experiencing across the nation or even in a local area a heightened or uncertain racial, social, or cultural climate, that can be difficult for those students to navigate within the confines of they're also trying to navigate going to school and living on campus and all that stuff. So being aware of the things that are going on, being aware of social justice issues, even religious or spiritual identities, being aware of those varying things can just create a more inclusive environment for those students. In terms of religious and spiritual identities, I had taken a class in diversity a couple of months ago. And this was something that they reminded us was that most educational calendars within the US center or adhere to traditional Christian holidays. And so students that are part of religious groups that aren't Christian, they don't get to be out of class for Ramadan. They don't get to be out of class for their their religious holidays and that kind of thing. So that can be difficult for those students to explain, or difficult for those students to navigate. So keeping that in mind, that there are a lot of holidays that we as Americans, or even anybody in the Christian faith that we celebrate, that most of our students may not celebrate. And so being sensitive to that, can be very helpful for those students. We do a holiday meal at NWAC every year, but we didn't get to do it this year, where we basically, faculty and staff, feed our students for free. And one of the most fun things of the holiday meal is trying to explain to international students what green bean casserole is. And the first time we did that, I was like, what are you talking about? And they didn't know what green bean casserole. I also had an international student that he said he wanted, we asked if he wanted ham, and he was like, sure. And he was like, but I don't eat pork. And we were like, then don't eat the ham. He didn't know that ham and pork were the same thing. So just those small things of trying to remember, like, people of different religious or spiritual identities, they can struggle with our quote unquote normal holiday traditions and the way we do things in a quote unquote normal way, or in an American way. So I know we've all heard of the golden rule, right? The golden rule is that you treat others the way you want to be treated, right? But the goal of inclusivity is that it's not me-centered, but it's you-centered. It's all centered around the person that you're with. And so when you're looking at, advising practices, you're looking at, how you run your office, or even the things you're doing in your classroom, to shift to a more you-centered focus, you can use or abide by what's called the platinum rule. And so the platinum rule basically just says you treat others the way that they'd like to be treated. And if you're not sure how they want to be treated, then you just ask them. And so just knowing, I know for me, like in my role at NWAC and my counterpart in Bentonville, we've kind of tried to shift to this model where it is very you-centered, and not what we want for advising, what we think we need, but really what does the student need, and how can we be more inclusive to really meet the student where they are and be what they need us to be. So looking at inclusive language. So inclusive language, it encompasses a lot of different things. We're gonna mostly focus on names and pronouns, and then some other inclusive language, but there's you can go out and find tons of information on what language you can use instead of what you're using to be more inclusive. But really the goal of inclusive language is to avoid using words and expressions or assumptions that stereotype people, that demean them or exclude them. And I said this before, but a good rule of thumb on your language, labels are for soup cans. So if you're gonna, check yourself, say, hey, am I saying, if what I'm saying, is that more of a label or is it more inclusive? To start off with names. So I know there's a lot of debate versus chosen name or preferred name. Really, it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're using one of the other. So I use chosen name today, but if you have, there's different ways that you can be inclusive just by using someone's chosen name. So one of the easiest ways to do that is that if you have a chosen name, to display it to your students. I'm going to use QB as an example because I know her name is long and a lot of people get it wrong. But a good way for somebody to know if QB has a chosen name is for her to display it on her email signatures, in her office or desk space, in the classroom, on Zoom, those kinds of things. So the first easiest way to be inclusive is start with yourself, right? So then you can ask your students if they have a preferred or chosen name. It's okay to ask everyone instead of just asking people that you're not sure about. I try to make it a pretty good rule of thumb that anytime I meet with a student, after introducing myself, I ask, is there a name that you prefer that I call you? Or do you have a nickname or something like that? It is totally okay to ask students that. What you want to try to make sure you do is that you ask everyone. That's what inclusion is not just asking for a certain group, but asking for everyone. It takes a while to train yourself to do those things, but it is something that's really easy. Specifically for maybe students that have Americanized names because they are from other countries, or they have different cultural identities and their name is related to that and it's difficult for people to pronounce. Nicknames, chosen names, even shortened names like, their name is Matthew, but they go by Matt. That's something really easy that we can do to be more inclusive to really everyone. So being more inclusive also means remembering not to do something. So students that live within the transgender community often have to deal with what's called dead naming. And so dead naming is using someone's legal or birth name that they no longer use. So in higher education, it's really hard for some students to experience, or it's really easy for them to experience dead naming because a lot of them have chosen names that may be on rosters or maybe on their Blackboard or Canvas, but it's not in the system as their legal name because maybe they haven't went through a legal name change yet. And so dead naming is really just using a name that they don't go by. But within the transgender community, using a person's chosen name actually leads to a lower risk of mental distress and depression, and even lower risk of suicide because you're using a name, just using their chosen name. And so within the LGBTQIA+ community, there's a huge amount of mental distress that occurs, and a lot of that is just attributed to dead naming. And so that's an easy way to just remember, like, even though it says, even though it says Emily on someone's student record, but they go by Jason, just remembering to be careful not to use their legal name and use their chosen name all the time. Also with dead naming, it's okay for you as a professional if you hear other people use the wrong name for someone to correct them. You can do that in a polite manner, and we're going to talk about a little bit about that in a little bit later. But it is totally okay for you to say to someone, hey, that's not what that person goes by. They go by this name. So just think just that way, you can just say, hey, like, it's cool. Another way to increase inclusivity with names is to review your practices, review your policies and your procedures, and see if they allow for a chosen name to be available for a student. I know most of us at our colleges have that, but one place that sometimes we forget about is our internal reporting systems and our forms. So like if we're using internal reports that they pull from, like NWAC's a Banner school, so I'm going to use us as an example. If I run a report from Banner and it pulls everybody's legal names and I'm calling students from that list, I'm going to probably more than likely get at least one person that I use the wrong name because my report doesn't show the preferred name or the chosen name for students. So something like that, having a spot on our forms that allow for a student to enter a chosen name is also an easy way to be more inclusive with names and pronouns. So with gender pronouns, it's one of the easiest ways. Another easy way to be inclusive is to use third person pronouns. So you can always train yourself to use neutral pronouns all the time. And that way, you don't have to worry about asking people for their pronouns and that kind of thing. I think someone posed a question before to Jenny about asking about when you're communicating with other staff members through email and things like that, or you're putting notes in your advising system for notes and things like that. What do you do with pronouns? If you don't know a person's pronouns, or even if you do, just use third person pronouns. You can say they, them, their, you can say the student. If you want to train yourself to be as neutral as possible, training yourself to use third person pronouns is the easiest way to do that. So I hope I don't know whoever asked that question, but I hope that answers their question for that. Again, with gender pronouns, displaying your preferred pronouns is an easy way to let students know and let other people know that you're trying to be inclusive or that you're an ally for them. So like for me, I said today, my pronouns are he, him, his. You can put that in your email signatures. You can do the same thing basically with your chosen name that you do with your pronouns, is display them on campus, display them in your offices. When you introduce yourself to your class or to students, tell them what pronouns you prefer. You can attach, they have things that you can attach to your name tags that have preferred pronouns, those kinds of things. Really any place or any introduction or any space that you're going to occupy, you have the control to display your preferred pronouns. So don't be afraid to use that. It's also okay to ask students for their pronouns. So you may not be comfortable asking everyone, but get in the habit of doing that. If you get in generally, if you introduce yourself with pronouns, most of the time people will introduce back with their pronouns. If they don't know what that is, that's fine. But the more you do that, the more you get a little bit more comfortable doing it. And any student that's looking for that as a person or looking for that as to know if you're an ally, that's a good way to say, I'm an ally for inclusivity because I'm telling you what my pronouns are. With names and pronouns, I know this is in the pronouns portion, but even with names, you're gonna make mistakes. You're not gonna get it right every time, but don't be afraid of making a mistake, okay? You're not always gonna get it right, and that's okay. But when you do get it right, or when you mess up, you can just correct yourself and move on. So I'm a transgender person, so well, I've worked at NWAC the entire time. Even when I came out, I had already been working at NWAC. And so a lot of people knew me by my old name, and now they know me by my new name. And so multiple times I've had people slip up and call me the old name, and they like apologize profusely, and then they want to send an email saying they're sorry. You don't need to do that. If you make a mistake, just correct yourself and then move on. When someone else corrects you, then you just say thank you and move on. The key here is that don't focus on it, apologize, move on. Also get in the habit though of interrupting other people with a quick correction. So if somebody says, they use the wrong pronoun or they use the wrong name, just interrupt them and say, hey, they use this name or they go by this pronoun. And that's okay to interrupt people and correct them. Also think about every time that you get it wrong, then try to do it right 3 times. Like I said, you're not going to always get it right every time, but the more you practice, the more you'll get it right. Also, don't be afraid to practice with your friends or with coworkers or staff inside your office. So if you have, office meetings every couple of weeks or whatever, think about doing a practice session of, hey, let's practice, introducing ourselves with pronouns or introducing ourselves with chosen names or anything like that. That's okay to practice and get used to doing it right. So using inclusive language isn't just about names and pronouns. Our language in our day-to-day lives is very focused on, it's very gender focused. And so I have a little bit of, and I'm gonna look at my screen so I can see what they all are. But I have some things that we can kind of look at, okay, instead of saying this, let's try this. So instead of saying, he, him, she, he, then use the word they all the time. We already kind of talked about that. I'm really bad to say, hey man, what's going on? Well, I tend to say that to everyone. And to me, like in my mind, I'm like, well, that's pretty neutral because I'm using it for everyone. But in reality, if I'm referring to someone, I should use the term person or individual. Instead of using the term stewardess, you want to use the term flight attendant. Actress, instead of using that, use the word actor. This one's a big one, congressman. That implies that all Congress people or all representatives are men. And so you want to use legislator, Congress representative, state representative. With husband and wife, not everyone is a husband or a wife. And so you can be more inclusive in your language by using the term spouse or partner. Same thing with the term ladies or gals. They're just people. So you can just say, hey, everyone, hey, folks, y'all. That's a big one around here. We all like to use that. And even as greetings, I know a lot of us, I'm always, I think on a daily basis, I do this and I have to correct myself all the time, is using the term, hey guys. That implies that everyone you're talking to is a guy. So instead of using that, especially in your introductions, like in a classroom or in a large group, just say something like, hey everyone, hey all, hey y'all, anything like that. Also there's a lot of professions that we assume or that have male connotations to them. So like firemen, policemen, mailman, even freshmen on campus. So all of those imply that the people doing those things are men, and they're not. And so using terms like police officer, firefighter, mail carrier, or even first year student are just it's just more inclusive. So there's also pieces to it that are not just about gender as well. So if you think about, we tend to say things like the inner city or the ghetto, or where I'm from, you talk about the hood. Those have negative connotations to them. And so using something instead of that is a little bit more inclusive. So instead of using terms like ghetto or hood or even inner city or the projects, you can use words like under-resourced. Instead of using disadvantaged neighborhoods living with high poverty rates. Instead of things like homeless or the homeless, those are people that are either housing insecure or people experiencing homelessness. Things like people on food stamps or, hungry and those kinds of things. You want to use terms like food poverty or food insecure. This one's a big one for me, illegal immigrant or illegal alien. I hate that word because that implies a person is illegal, and a person is not illegal. They might do illegal things, but they themselves, for being who they are, is not illegal. So that term, just remember they're undocumented. Disabled, handicapped, crippled, those are people living with a disability. With inclusion, you can use what's called person first language. And so that basically puts the person before whatever you're talking about. So, with a person that's living with a disability, you wouldn't say, this is my friend James, he's disabled. You might say, this is my friend James, he lives with diabetes, or he lives with cerebral palsy. So you're putting the person first. Also, I know we say this and it's pretty common, but a handicap tag or a handicap parking space, that's not inclusive language. If we just use the term accessible, that implies that everyone using that tag or that space is living with a disability, and they may, but they may not be. They just may need the accessible space. The terms ethnic or urban, you want to switch those out for more inclusive language like multiracial or biracial or person of color. The term Indian, as in, I have somebody in my family that says this, Indian with the feathers, not with the dot, and it's insane, and I have to correct them every time. The term Indian is not inclusive. Those people are native.
Register and collect guns.
Sorry.
This huge federal
Those are people
buyback
that
program
are
where
in
no
the Native
one,
American
no
population,
normal citizen
or you
can
can
have the
refer
right
to
to
them as
buy
an
a gun
indigenous
unless you pay
person.
$200 a year
Just a reminder to
for a
mute yourself
licensing fee.
if you are.
And that kind of got her up.
I think I got it.
Thank you.
Sorry. And a big term also for me, because I have someone in my life that they do have a child that was born in Down syndrome, is using the term retarded. That is not an inclusive term at all. Someone that was born with Down syndrome, you would refer to them as a person born with Down syndrome. So just adjusting small things in our day-to-day language can really make it more inclusive. Um, I have a resource for this list. It's one that someone shared with me. So I'm going to share my notes with Jenny, and we can send them out. And that way you guys can have, or you all can have all of the resources that I used, or some of them. So another good way to be more inclusive is really just get involved and be an ally for your students. So let students, they need to know that you're an ally. So try to display things that let them know you're an ally. So, you know, books, signs, anything you can think of that let them know you're an ally on campus. Every year, NWAC does an initiative for DACA and Dreamer students. And so every year, our office that handles that, they print up these pieces of paper, and you can write your name on them, and they say, I'm a DACA ally. And so I get a new one every year, because by the end of the year, mine's all matted up and it's been messed up on my door. But we get them every year if you want one. And really all it says is your name and I'm a DACA ally. And so what that does to a student is that tells them, if I need something, if I just am looking for someone that I know is going to be on my side, then that's a good way to provide something for someone so that they know. And that's probably one of the easiest ways to let students know that you're supportive of them, let students know that you are an ally, is to get involved and post things that they're going to see. Also being an advocate on campus. So get involved on campus and find ways to create visibility for students. Really what I've tried to do is look at the students on campus, look at the demographic of students on my campus and figure out or look at how visible are they. You know, I encourage everyone to do that in your classroom, in your office, the students you come into contact with. If you are not sure if they're visible or not, they're probably not. And so find ways to create visibility for themselves, for your students. Also educate yourself on resources on campus and within the community. So not all of our campuses in the state of Arkansas are campuses where people live. A lot of us are commuter campuses. And so knowing what resources students have within the community that they live is a really good way to create those connection points. That's also a good way for you to get involved. You know, I'm not saying you have to go out right now and get involved in everything, but if you're passionate about creating a more inclusive experience for students and really advocating more for people, then find ways to create visibility for not just students, but for people in your community. And a good way to do that is to educate yourself on what resources there are available. Also look at recognizing problem areas. So review your practices in your offices or in your classroom, review your processes to see if there's areas that can be improved to increase inclusivity. Don't be afraid to introduce ideas on how to make things better or how to make things be more inclusive. Really, those are just easy ways to be inclusive on campus. They don't cost money. Really, it's just all about creating visibility for people that aren't visible. Also, try to learn from your student populations. All of us have varying student populations. They all look different. And the easiest way to know, the easiest way to know what you can do is really just to learn from them. So implementing inclusive design, that puts people at the center of your practices and the center of the processes that you go through every day. And a diversity perspective gives insight to that student's experience on campus. So make sure you're educating yourself, make sure you're educating others in your office or others around you. And then also make sure you're networking with other people in your field. So all of us in here are some sort of advisor, whether we do it in a classroom or we do it on a day-to-day basis in an advising center, but we're all advisors and we all have varying experiences with helping students of different populations. So reach out to each other. If you have students that you are within the LGBTQIA+ community and you're not sure how to help them, send me an email and I can help you. Making sure that we're networking with each other is a good way to really learn from our populations, but also help students and be a little bit more inclusive and get kind of ideas on what we can and can't do. So you also want to be a resource for students. I know we talked about being an ally, and an advocate, but you also want to be a resource. So take time to learn about what you have available on campus and within your community. No resource, either in the community or on campus, is insignificant. Usually it's there because there's a need for it. So within the academic realm, you're thinking of tutor services, libraries. Think about libraries off of campus that provide services. Some libraries have computers and things like that that students can utilize when they're not on campus. So even those things. Computer labs, textbooks, or technology assistance. I know in Northwest Arkansas, we have a couple of programs that they sometimes will help with textbooks assistance and that kind of stuff. So knowing those things about your community, you can be a resource for students. Also think about health and wellness resources. So most of all of us have some kind of counseling or mental health resource on campus for students, which is great. But a lot of students also want to know what doctors' offices or clinics that they can go to that are inclusive for them, particularly the LGBTQIA+ population. We have a really active Pride Club at NWAC. And that's the one thing that a lot of students ask is, what doctor can I go to that's going to be sensitive to me as an LGBTQIA+ person? So think about those things. Also think about what resources like legal services or even family services for our students, that even though they're not necessarily on campus, but what in the community can we, what things do they have available for them? Food and housing, a lot of our colleges have food pantries, but again, not all of our students are living on campus. So within the community, where are there food pantries or temporary housing, shelters, living assistance programs, that kind of thing, either on campus or off campus. With clubs and organizations, most all of us have some kind of club or organization that's dedicated to most of our student populations, but not all of them. And the way I like to do it, if there's one student that wants to have a club and they're the only one that it's going to benefit, then we should start a club for that student, because it's going to benefit them. Also think about community groups. What community groups are there that students that are in our underrepresented populations might be able to utilize or take advantage of. Same thing with churches, places of worship, that kind of stuff. So being inclusive and creating a more inclusive environment is sometimes about seeing something and speaking up. So students sometimes they experience things and they're not sure what to do with it, but for us as advocates and allies that we're trying to be more inclusive, if we need to abide by the see something, say something rule. So if you see something, then a good thing you can do is really just inquire about it. Start there. Don't be afraid to ask someone why they made that statement, why they asked that question. That's okay. Also take action. So if you see something that, or you witness something or you hear something and it makes you feel like it might be a little bit inappropriate, then go ahead and address it whenever you see them. Don't worry about making other people feel uncomfortable. If you feel like it's something inappropriate, then it's okay to say, hey, like that wasn't appropriate. That language you used wasn't appropriate. And that's okay. Also talk about things. So talk to others about things that you've seen or that you've witnessed. Talk to them about microaggressions or biases that you see or that you experience. Don't assume or don't be afraid to report any issues that might need to be reported. It's always a good rule of thumb. I worked in the Dean of Students office with conduct, so this I think has been like drilled into my brain. But if you don't tell someone what's going on, nobody will probably get the message, because more than likely the person it happened to isn't going to report it. So don't assume that it's already been reported. If it's something that you feel like needs to be reported, then report it. If they don't do anything with it, that's kind of out of your hands, but take the step to really say something and bring it up if you really feel like it's something that needs to be addressed. I'm going to transition now to inclusion in the classroom, because I know we have some faculty members and faculty advisors. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to use inclusion in your classroom. So with inclusion in your classroom, you want to try using teaching materials from various viewpoints and various backgrounds. So an easy way to do that is to highlight diversity within your subject field. So look at when there are celebratory holidays or celebratory months that highlight people in those populations. So for things like, June is Pride Month, look at, highlighting for the month of June, LGBTQIA+ individuals within your subject field. Also think about discussing contributions that are made to the field by underrepresented groups, and look at assessing your course content that introduces diverse ideas and concepts. You can also use content that recognizes diversity and acknowledges barriers to inclusion. Those are easy things like selecting content that engages in diversity or in a diverse area of ideas and perspectives. Look at considering some perspectives and if they're systematically underrepresented or absent. You can use multiple and diverse examples that don't marginalize students, and really just focus on using examples or content that speaks across gender, culture, socioeconomic status, age, religion, ability, all of that. You can also design your course elements for accessibility. And so you can do that by providing multiple ways for students to engage with course materials. You can provide multiple means of representation and materials. So like illustrations, glossaries, videos, all of that. You can use a variety of modalities, use adjustable formats, provide different means of action and expression. So you can offer a range of assessments for students to demonstrate learning opportunities or to provide feedback. You can provide multiple means of engagement, like choice of topics or assignment formats, that kind of thing. You also want to share with your students. So I've taught a couple of classes before. One of my most fun things to do is to share my experiences and my life and identity pieces with my students, because that is visibility for them. So they understand that I'm doing that and it's okay for them to do that as well. And then get to know your college's landscape. So most of us probably have seen fact books or something like that every year that our colleges send out that give you a demographic information. But just remember that not all of those things give you the entire landscape of what your college looks like. So a fact book is going to tell you how many, like the percentage of race for every student or gender, but there is very little data on students who identify as multiracial, of students who identify as biracial, or students that are within the LGBTQIA+ population. So there's very little data that you could actually pull, at least in Arkansas, from those students. So getting to know your landscape and getting to kind of know your students is really an easy way for you to say, are they visible? How can I make things a little bit more inclusive? And what can I do to be an advocate or an ally for them? So we're going to play a little bit of a game. If you work at NWAC or you're my friend on Facebook, you don't get to play because you probably know the answer to all these questions. But this is a picture of my family. I want you to spend a couple of minutes looking at this picture and trying to, and you don't have to put it in the chat, you can if you want, I guess. But look at the photo and see if you, based on this photo, can figure out the family structure, their race, their age, their religion, their veteran status, educational level, and maybe their abilities, or if they are living with any disabilities. So I'll give you guys a couple minutes. Okay, Aladdin, it's not really a couple minutes, it's just 1 minute. So this is my family. And if you said that this was a photo of a husband and a wife, you would be correct. That beautiful woman standing next to me is my wife. But if you said this was a husband and wife and their 2 children, you are wrong. This is actually a photo of my family. This is the young man on my right, or well, yeah, he's my right, is my nephew. His mom passed away about almost 10 years ago. So he lives with my mom. He's 17, he'll be going to college next fall. And the young girl on the very left is my younger sister. I am 23 years older than she is. If you said that I was a young 25, you're wrong. I'm almost 40. If you said that any of us are veterans, you're wrong. None of us are veterans. Our race, so myself and my nephew and my little sister, we are Caucasian, but my wife is actually multiracial. Her mom is biracial and she looks like a white woman, but she is Caucasian and Latinx. And so abilities, I have a disability, or I live with a disability, or quote unquote disability. And so all of those things, I put this in here and I play this game just so that we can kind of in our mind get a visual of how we make assumptions on things that we do every day and we don't mean to. Looking at this photo, it looks like a good photo of a mom and a dad and their 2 kids, right? But without knowing the whole story and without getting to know each individual in this photo, you don't get a full picture. And so a lot of this is personal for me because there's a lot of things that we go to for my nephew that people say, can all the parents stand up? And he doesn't have a parent that stands up for him. It's not his choice. She's just not there. And so just keeping in mind that our day-to-day language, whether we're doing it on purpose or we're not, our day-to-day language, if we can just find ways to be with our language to be a little bit more inclusive, it reduces the discomfort and the stress for our students. So that was pretty much all I had. I have time for some questions though.
Yes, and if you have a question, just feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
There were a couple of questions in the chat.
Okay.
There were a couple questions in the chat. However, I think that they've actually been answered. I just saw that there's something new. Hold on just a moment. Okay, the one that was about the platinum rule, Jill actually posted a wonderful link. And so hopefully, I'm hoping that helped, Lee. Let me know if not.
Does anyone have any other questions for Austin?
No?
Bueller.
Bueller. I have a question. How long have you been working with folks? You've done a very good job today. It's smooth and seamless. And how long have you been doing this where you're working with other colleges?
I have myself, so my mother-in-law, so I didn't share a fun fact. Fun fact about me is that like my wife, my mother-in-law, myself, my sister, and I had a cousin that we've all worked in student services at NWAC at some point together. Now it's just me and my mother-in-law. But so she and I gave a presentation like this at ACC about 4 years ago. I was part of a micro grant that we wrote for NWAC Equality. And so we that was our goal with the micro grant, was to really just be able to, we focused on LGBTQIA plus stuff, but we also got into other diversity in the classroom and that kind of stuff. And that's what our goal was, to do that for faculty and staff so that to be more inclusive. Outside of NWAC and ACC, you guys are the first group that I've done like this, where it was with other colleges other than just like my college group.
I loved what you said about the name, because we ran into that just the other day. I was testing a young person and realized that they were transitioning. And when I saw the name and then saw them, it was just, didn't, you know, so I went straight to our admissions coordinator, let them know, and she made sure to get with IT to make sure that their email address had their chosen name on it instead of their given, because that was something we had control of and could change. You know, granted, financial aid's financial aid, and it has to have whatever their legal name is. And then, you know, so I assured the person that I was going to let them know that, and Stephanie jumped on it and made sure, and even got their name on the system to be the shorter version of their official name. So it wasn't quite exactly what the student went by, but it was a lot closer, so they wouldn't have to keep explaining themselves.
So student IDs are a big place that a lot of colleges don't allow chosen names. And so NWAC actually, we don't really have a process, but it's a practice that a student can ask to have their preferred or their chosen name on their student ID. And so really the only place at NWAC that they can't have their chosen name is within the system. So like on their roster, or not roster, on their transcript, and things like that. But yeah, that was a problem we had. And I had we had a couple of people when I was over application processing that we worked really hard to get that as part of the process on the application. So if you're a banner school and you didn't know, a student can put a preferred name on the application and it will push through for everything, for rosters,
oh, that's wonderful.
Starfish, all Outlook, that kind of stuff. I just went through an IT request for someone I work with that he goes by Mark and his legal name is John, and he's worked at the college for like 12 years and been having to deal with people calling him John, even though his email signature says Mark. And so we got that fixed yesterday, and it took like 15 minutes maybe.
That's exciting.
Yeah, so little things like that, especially student IDs. If you don't have a process or a practice that allows that, that's something easily that any of you guys can make, or any of you can make a request for. Our dean of students was, when we brought that to her, she was like, yeah, we'll just do that. I'm just making that decision. That's what we're going to do. It's just a lot easier for students.
I'm glad to hear that with Banner. We're heading to Banner, so that's exciting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Well, thank you again, everyone in Austin, especially thank you to you. But thank you everyone for coming. Please check your email on Monday for a survey. We'll have some more information. Stay tuned about future Lunch and Learns. Thank you for your time. And we have recorded this and we will post it on our website. So I will also let you know that. And then Austin will be sending his notes that I will send out to all of you who attended, and you can feel free to share it with whomever you would like. So thanks again. And board members, if you wouldn't mind staying on for a few minutes, for like 2 minutes, that would be great. Thanks, everyone.